everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this, our inaugural session of the Science and Religion and Interfaith Context Reading Group. I'm Rebecca Wallace. I'm a DPhil student in Science and Religion at the University of Oxford. And I'd like to start with just a brief statement about these sessions, because this is our first and our newest reading group, which we're really excited to offer. And I think it's really important because science and religion has seen this kind of impressive rise in popularity. And this has changed even in the 4 short years that I've been in the discipline. I've seen this grow into something that's really, really special and really exciting. And I think one of the reasons for this is it's a kind of a center of a lot of really important, and I would even say vital in the sense of living and current questions that we increasingly encounter in our daily lives. And so the goal of these sessions at Oxford Interfaith Forum is to weave together these empirical insights, spiritual teachings. And the goal is kind of to, if not fully answer these questions, at least explore them in a really thorough and thoughtful way. But specifically, the reading group suggests that the complex history and the interactions between these disciplines need to be better understood, specifically in interfaith contexts, and particularly with regards to ethical challenges that are posed by contemporary scientific advances. And this is really important, I think, to pull on a resources of kind of a really rich array of faith traditions. And so the goal will be to explore how the underlying psychological, social, cultural, religious, physical, neuroscientific, cognitive scientific, and theological factors shape the different ways in which we approach the relationship between science and religion and what that means. I'm honored to be the chair for this inaugural session. I wanted to offer just a quick word before I pass on the mic to Professor Cunningham of support and encouragement to Tom McLeish, who was originally going to be our inaugural speaker, but we were all very sad to hear the recent announcement that he's just been diagnosed with advanced cancer. And so I just wanted to take a minute to offer a word of support for he and his family in what I know must be a very difficult time for them. And we're very grateful and thankful for everything that he's done, and our prayers go with he and his loved ones at this time. I'm going to hand over the mic, as it were, to Professor Philip Cunningham. Professor Philip Cunningham is a professor of theology, specializing in Christian-Jewish relations, and he's the director of the Institute for Jewish-Catholic Relations of St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He has served as president of the International Council of Christians and Jews and on the Advisory Committee on Catholic-Jewish Relations for the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. He's the webmaster of the internet resource Dialogica of the Council of Centers on Jewish-Christian Relations. And his latest book was just published by Paulus Press, entitled Maxims for Mutuality, Principles for Catholic Theology, Education, and Preaching About Jews and Judaism. And with that, Professor Cunningham, would you please take over?
Well, thank you very much, Rabbi Wallace. It's a pleasure to be with you virtually. If I may extend from this side of the pond, condolences on the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Many in the United States were very attached to her over the decades. So we're with you in spirit in this transition that you're undergoing. It's my honor to introduce the speaker for today, Rabbi Abraham Skorka, who served as the rabbi of B'nai Tikva Synagogue in Buenos Aires, Argentina for 42 years. And he also served as the rector of the Seminario Rabbinico Latinoamericano in Buenos Aires for 20 years until recently. He's written widely on biblical and Talmudic studies and on Jewish-Christian relations. And of course, he also holds a PhD in biophysics. So who better to talk about the interconnections between religion and science? From 2017 to 2019, Rabbi Skorka was a university professor here at St. Joseph's University, where he worked with our institute, myself and our co-director, Adam Gregerman, the Institute for Jewish-Catholic Relations. And he is also an honorary professor of Hebrew law at the Universidad del Salvador in Buenos Aires, and has been awarded honorary doctoral degrees from the Pontificia Universidad Católica Argentina, the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, Sacred Heart University in Connecticut, Holy Family University in Pennsylvania, and last by St. Joseph's University here in Pennsylvania. He currently is serving as the Senior Research Fellow for Jewish Studies and Jewish Christian Relations at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. He was the 2017 recipient of the Jan Karski Eagle Award, past recipients of which included Elie Wiesel, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and the former chair of the Anti-Defamation League, Abraham Foxman. As you know, he co-authored a book with Pope Francis, who was then the Archbishop of Buenos Aires, Jorge Mario Bergoglio. Their book was titled On Heaven and Earth in English. He's the author of 7 books, numerous articles and papers, including writing an approbation for a significant Orthodox rabbinic statement from 2017 on Christian-Jewish relations that was entitled Between Jerusalem and Rome. So with that, I invite Rabbi Skorka to offer his remarks on science and religion and their interconnections. I would suggest to people if questions occur to you during Rabbi Skorka's remarks, you may want to put them in the chat, and after his remarks and we turn to the Q&A, we won't have lost any question that had occurred, and we can turn to them at that point as well as have general conversation. So with that, please, Rabbi Skorka, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon or good evening for everybody. My gratitude to the organizers of the Oxford Interfaith Forum for inviting me to be part of it. My condolences to the whole British community for the passing away of Queen Elizabeth, and my prayers and blessings to Professor Tom McLeish. Okay, let's go to our to the theme of our lesson. Much has been written and many arguments have been put forward about the relationship of science and religion. Did religion develop out of superstitious ignorance? Is it nothing more than a mere illusion, as defined by Sigmund Freud in his famous essay of 1927, The Future of an Illusion? Does science have the final word in all areas that make up human existence? Can there be a dialogue between science and religion? How does the controversy between these concepts influence society? Are religion and science realms that reject each other, or are they complementary to each other? An analysis of what has happened from the end of the 19th century to the present can allow us to find some answer to such questions. In the 19th century, the great advances in knowledge achieved after the Renaissance were clarified and systematized. Through common sense experimentation and reasoning, monumental theories were developed, such as the electromagnetism of James Maxwell in physics. In chemistry, there was a huge advance from the atomic theory of John Dalton in 1803 to the development of thermodynamics in the second half of the century. The work of Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch served as examples in the field of medicine. The foundations of mathematical analysis through the works of Augustin-Louis Cauchy, Friedrich Gauss, and Karl Weierstrass, among others, and exemplify the achievements in this field. Heinrich Hertz's work, which enabled the development of devices that use electromagnetic waves, such as the radio, and the confirmation of Maxwell's hypothesis about the electromagnetic properties of light, crowned a century in which reason made superlative achievements. many religious institutions simply maintained their structures, dogmas, and unalterable conceptions by simply ignoring or rejecting all these advances. The deepest echoes of the spiritual crisis that arose in the rapidly changing era came from individuals such as Friedrich Nietzsche or Soren Kierkegaard, who perceived the dynamics of change and the absence of a reaction from the churches to it. The death of God killed by human beings, as expressed by Nietzsche, is one of the most dramatic manifestations of this sentiment. Perhaps in the same sense, Karl Marx's statement that religions are the opium of peoples should be understood. The Europe of the 19th century contained, on the one hand, the ideology of the French Revolution, and on the other hand, the new form of slavery of the industrial age that was beginning its overpowering growth. Perhaps Marx was disappointed by the absence of religious voices, like those of the prophets in ancient Israel who advocated for the rights of the poor. Maybe it was because he saw that contemporary religious institutions lacked the ethically critical urgency he expected from them that Marx compared religious to deadening drugs. Charles Darwin's evolutionary theory in the second half of the 19th century introduced new knowledge and controversy into European culture. Science seemed to replace God as the source of the truth of existence. Since the Enlightenment, a theocentric culture was gradually displaced and replaced by an anthropocentric one. By the end of the 19th century, humanity, armed with the power of science, seems to be the answer to the age-old search of the meaning of human existence, and even of existence itself. It was at this moment of the apparent triumph of science, at the turn of the 20th century, that new scientific ideas began to undermine an easy confidence in its power to answer all questions with certainty. In 1900, Max Planck devised his famous equation known as Planck's law. Planck demonstrated mathematically that the electromagnetic radiation given off by heated objects is not released as a continuous flow, but is composed of discrete units of quanta, of energy. This upset classical theoretical physics because energy could not longer be understood as emitted and absorbed by matter in any quantity, but only in well-defined amounts delimited by Planck's quanta. This was the birth of the new field of quantum physics. In 1905, using Planck's concepts of quanta, Albert Einstein explained the nature of light in the process, overturning the 17th century models of Newton and Christian Heinz. Einstein showed that light itself is quantized into discrete packages later called photons. Further experimental observations showed that elementary particles can behave like waves and particles at the same time. In 1927, building on these developments, Werner Heisenberg developed what came to be known as the famous Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. It stated that the more precisely the position of some subatomic particles is known, the less precisely can its momentum be determined, and vice versa. In other words, whereas classical physics was confident that it could eventually measure subatomic properties in exact values and quantities, it was now apparent that science could only assess the fundamental characteristics of elementary particles of matter in terms of probabilities and likelihoods. Uncertainty and randomness seemed woven into the very fabric of existence. In addition to this, in 1905 and 1916, respectively, Einstein published his theories of special and general relativity. He argued mathematically contrary to what our everyday sense might tell us, that we do not live in a universe of three spatial dimensions: height, width, and depth, and a separate one-directional dimension of time. Instead, we live in a single four-dimensional continuum called space-time, in which the speed of light is constant, regardless of the frame of reference. This way of looking at existence is counterintuitive to our perceptions. It led Einstein to postulate such exotic things as black holes and gravitational waves, which have now been proven to exist. Gravity waves as recently as 2016, thus proving by empirical observations the basic soundness of Einstein's calculations and concepts. What this all means is that although the scientific knowledge that had been acquired up to that point was impressive, it became painfully apparent that the number of things we didn't know or understand was enormous. The underlying nature of the universe was, in fact, far from everyday way of thinking and perceiving of most human beings. The discovery of radioactivity was another amazing insight of the 20th century. The natural transmutation of matter through its decomposition into radiation energy opened new pathways of thought and led to many practical applications, ranging from new medical tools and treatments, the creation of new sources of energy, and the manufacture of nuclear bombs capable of destroying the planet many times over. It was not only in physics that uncertainties, the realization of limits and moral ambiguities emerged with redoubled force. In mathematics too, Georg Cantor's theory of infinite sets suggested that there is not a one single infinite reality, but rather a set of infinites of different categories. This has taken physical expression in speaking not about the universe, but the multiverse. This mathematical development in the 20th century was another blow to the widespread sense of omnipotence that had appeared in European culture in the 19th century. Science was reaching, especially in the field of theoretical physics, into unfathomable dimensions that at certain moments seems to verge on mysticism. These recent scientific developments described only briefly here had important impacts on culture. Science's influence was not limited to academia, but projected its achievements into society in general, deeply influencing everyday life. Sigmund Freud and Albert Einstein were icons of the 20th century, but scientific theories are often oversimplified and distorted, presented as absolute truths and sometimes malicious, mispresented. For example, the ideas of Friedrich Nietzsche and Charles Darwin, twisted in ways their originators would have rejected, and served as the underlying ideology of Nazism. This leads to the realization that when discussing the topic of science and religion, the first factor that must be taken into account is that one influence the other. Both are in a constant situation of interaction. deeply clashing at times and complementing each other at other times. The one set of tremendous scientific advances in the 19th century was greeted by many religious communities with suspicion and rejection. In retrospect, we can see that religion in the West at the turn of the 20th century generally resisted efforts to incorporate this new scientific perspective into their own thought worlds. Instead, fundamentalisms developed. On the other hand, an overconfidence in 19th century science's ability to reveal all hidden truth led some people to a destructive pridefulness, one that seemingly intensified when at the 20th century science shook the foundations of this hubris. Perhaps World War II should be seen as the manifestation of a process in which the combination of a significant spiritual inertia and on the one hand, and the anthropocentrism sustained by achievements of science and technology on the other, constructed the greatest monument to human barbarism. It seems to me that humanity had lost its grounds of being present before God. Humanity was enraptured with its own achievements, and some people wanted to enthrone themselves in the place of the Creator. Positivism, the philosophy that the only source of authoritative knowledge is what is gleaned through the senses and interpreted through reason and logic, totally succumbed in the face of the world wars. Perplexity and uncertainty supplanted it in scientific circles, a process that continues to the present day. In the political and social realms, positivism was superseded by the absurd and the immoral. One of the great triumphs of Nazism was to show the power of the absurd to govern, the absurd that knows how to manipulate base human instincts and to unleash them in extreme forms of paroxysms. In 1994, a book by the French, written by the French political scientist Gilles Kepel, named The Revenge of God, the resurgence of Islam, Christianity, and Judaism in the modern world, describes a process of reawakening to religion in extremely zealous forms and developed in the late 70s in the three monotheistic religions. According to Keppel, God was once more being placed at the center of people's life, displacing such idols of the recent past as Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, but it was a harsh and vengeful God. The revival was not the product of a dialogue between science and religion, but stemmed of a culture that had characterized Europe for centuries, and the amazing discoveries of science with its nuclear dangers stalking the planet were the substrate of the development of new and extreme attitudes about religion. The return to God that Keppel describes and that continues its development up to the present is not the results of meditation and spiritual experience, but rather is a religious revival with a fanatical aspect as its defining feature. Its most polarized and insane expressions are seen in crimes committed in the name of God. On the other hand, there is also been a resurgence of interest in the mystical aspects of religion. The search of hidden realities and transcendent experiences has become widespread, with the Jewish mystical tradition, the Kabbalah, being one source in the spiritual search of people seeking to know the meaning of their own lives. In this context, the dialogue between science and religion remains an unfinished project in human history. In the past, there were many collisions between the two. Religion was, in fact, an integral part of science in the Middle Ages. And when, in the Renaissance, discoveries like those of Galileo and Copernicus revolutionized thought, different religious institutions began to reject newly discovered natural truths and to persecute their discoveries. This separated religion and science into binary opposites. During the Enlightenment, and confrontation erupted between them regularly. Many scientists began to feel omnipotent by disqualifying the phenomenon of religion, reducing it to a product of the human inability to explain natural phenomena. And religious people in many cases disqualified science by making their beliefs immutable and superior to scientific theories and even probable discoveries. The new and unsettling discoveries that shook scientific self-confidence in the 20th century have recently led to more sophisticated discussions about the relationship between spiritual and the scientific views. Ken Wilber's 2001 compilation of the opinions of great scientists on this subject in his book, Quantum Questions, Mystical Writings of the World's Great Physicists, is a very good example of an emerging paradigm shift that can be seen in the writings of quantum physicists. These writings by brilliant scientific minds are steeped in the humility necessary to finding a balanced path about the relationship between religion and science. Now, let me explicitly bring the rabbinic tradition into this discussion. The Bible teaches that nature is the work of God, and so contains traces of its creator. Psalms 19 is a very good example. The psalmist begins by describing the harmony of nature and goes on to relate this to the harmony of the ethical standards revealed by God. One inspires you to reflect on the other. The same can be found in Psalm 104 and in the following words from Jeremiah 5:22. Should you not revere me, says the Lord? Should you not tremble before me? Who set the sand as a boundary to the sea, as a limit for all time, not to be transgressed? Thought its wave toss, they cannot prevail. Though they roar, they cannot pass it. The perfection, end of the quote, the perfection of nature and the discovery of its laws have a double meaning. On the one hand, they testify the work of a supernatural power that ordered the cosmos and everything in it. And on the other, that transcendent greatness can be discerned by human beings who have the capacities to discover, as Einstein would say, part of the plans that God had when creating the cosmos. Maimonides composed in the 12th century one of the fundamental works of Jewish culture, the Mishneh Torah, the code in which is found the legal and ethical tradition accepted by all the Jewish people. In its beginning, it refers to the foundations of the Hebrew Creed, Hilchot Yesodei Torah. The essence of the creed is its description of God, together with the characteristics of nature, God's great creation. It presents the attitude that Jews must adopt when analyzing and studying nature. In the second chapter, the second paragraph, Halacha of Hilchot Yesodei Torah, Maimonides affirmed, what is the path that attain love and fear of God when a person contemplates his wondrous and great deeds and creations and appreciates God's infinite wisdom that surpasses all comparison? He will immediately love, praise, and glorify God, yearning with tremendous desire to know God's great name, as David stated in the book of Psalms, my soul thirsts for the Lord, for the living God. When someone continues to reflect, says Maimonides, on these same matters, he will immediately recall in awe and fear, appreciating how he is a teeny, lowly, and dark creature, standing with his flimsy, limited wisdom before the one who is of perfect knowledge. As David stated, when I see your heavens, the work of your fingers, I wonder what is a human that you should think of him, in Psalms chapter 8. But based on this concept, continues writing Maimonides, I will explain important principles regarding the deeds of the master of the worlds to provide a foothold for a person of understanding to develop love for God, as our sages said regarding love. In this manner, you will recognize the one who spoke and thus brought the world into being. End of the quotation. The last is a verse from Psalms 33. Maimonides goes on to suggest that the correct reading of the messages inscribed in nature and those unveiled by science can help us find the path of faith. At the beginning of the codification of the laws, in which he defines paganism and everything related to it, the sages describes how the acute perception, the Maimonides described, how the acute perception and analytical capability of Abraham when he studied natural processes, especially astronomical ones, led him to discover the transcendent God. The sources that Maimonides elaborated upon in his writing here are in the older rabbinic, he took that from the older rabbinic Midrash, Midrash Rabbi 38, chapter 38. In Talmudic literature, it's possible to find opinions in which the idea of messages inscribed in nature is clearly evident, as we read in Eruvin, the tractate Eruvin of the Talmud, Babylonian Talmud 100b. Rabbi Yochanan said, even if the Torah had not been given, we would nonetheless have learned modesty from the cat. Rashi explains, which covers its excrement, and that stealing, Rashi says, is objectionable. From the ant we learn, Rashi says, which does not take grain from another ant, and forbidden relations from the dove, which is faithful to its partner, and proper relations from the rooster, which first appears the hen and then mates with it. In the 20th century, Rabbi Abraham Yitzchak Cohen Cook was one of the most important figures in the recreation of Jewish culture. When the cornerstone of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem was set in 1925 during a ceremony that was shunned by extremely Orthodox Jews, Cook, who was at that time the chief Ashkenazi rabbi of the land of Israel, was present. His mere presence reflected his belief in the complementary that must exist between science and religion. Jerusalem, the city of holiness and religion, formally opened its doors to science. In his address at that 1925 ceremony, Rabbi Kook said, Jewish spirituality seeks not only to deepen the sacredness of Torah with the Jewish people, but also serves as a means for the spread and absorption of ideas. Jewish spirituality serves to propagate Jewish ideas and values from the private domain of Judaism into the public arena of the world at large. For this purpose, the Jews have been established as a light unto the nations. Jewish spirituality also served to absorb the general knowledge resulting from the collective effort of all humanity by adapting the good and useful aspects of the general knowledge into our treasury of a purified way of living. Ultimately, this inclusion also serves as a means of judicious engagement with the world at large. Toward the achievement of this goal, Hebrew University can serve as a great and worthy instrument. End of the quotation. A related opinion is that of the 20th century Israeli scholar Yeshayahu Leibovich. From him, science and religions are two absolutely different realms. To science belong all the subjects that human beings can empirically analyze through experiments and laboratories or through all kinds of practical observations. To religion belong all the things that cannot be proven through scientific methods. He used to say that human values, such as not to steal, not to kill, are matters of faith. The distinction proposed by Leibovich between these two concepts is undoubtedly valid, but nonetheless, there are ways in which one comes into dialogue with the other. There is a very famous midrash in which the rabbinic sages teach that each person has to imitate his creator. Just as God is merciful and pious, so must a human being be. In the same way, it is possible to say that since the creator is one, so the human being must be one. It is very simple from an ethical point of view to understand this interpretative proposal. A human being must maintain an ethic of justice and mercifulness in all circumstances. But what about the other features of human life? What about the dichotomy between science and religion? Einstein devoted the last 30 years of his life to try to mathematically unify two different natural forces, the electromagnetic with the gravitational, the only two forces known at the time. To unify things has always been a challenge for human intellect and spirit. Even more so, the two subjects of science and religion that are so essential to humanity's search for meaning should be unified in dialogue. The astonishing discoveries of the different sciences since the start of the 20th century have challenged human intellect with new and very intricate views of the reality of existence. It may be that God allows humans, the most gifted of creatures, to learn more and more about the existing universe in order to help them find paths to their creator. Since the very moment of their creation, human beings have in front of them the choice of living with God in a unified reality, putting science and religion into dialogue, or of dissociating them from each other and from the creator, and so live alone in the universe. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Rabbi Skorka. You've taken us on a journey through the history of civilization in a very short period of time. If I may sum up some things that struck me, and then I'll get the conversation going by asking you a question or two, if I might. So it seemed to me that among other things, you began by understanding that in the European Enlightenment, that religion which had prevailed started to give credence to an empirical way of looking at reality, namely through scientific method and investigation. That led to its successes led to a certain overconfidence in science that was shaken in the late 19th, early 20th centuries, both by scientific discoveries like Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, and also by developments in the world, such as the invention of weapons of mass destruction, that particularly in nuclear weapons, but also even in the destruction of the environment by human activity. In terms of religion, you sketched out that the reaction to science took a number of different forms in religious communities. One was a fundamentalistic response that became zealous and in some cases even violent in the name of God, which you condemned. It also led in other quarters to a sense for the spiritual, for the mystical, for something that transcended sort of organized or traditional, conventional religious formulas. And then you brought us, I think, if I may say, to a couple of arguments or paths to the future. You said, for example, that in both science and in religious communities that humility is needed, that humility is essential to recognize the limitations that human intellect and awareness has. You felt that you cited Rav Kook in terms of religions ought to engage in, quote, a judicious engagement with science. And you pointed to scientists, like the physicist's book you mentioned, trying to find spiritual or deeper meaning in science. And so this is another example of humility. And you concluded, if I may end this rapid summary by saying that the different realms, one based on empiricism and one based on faith, were the terms you used, need to be unified in dialogue, that there should be a constant interaction between them from their respective realms of activity. So that's how I organized in my mind your sweeping and helpful presentation. So as a person who is both a rabbi and a scientist, I'd like to pose a question that comes from my own Catholic tradition, and that is shared by other Christian traditions also. In recent Catholic documents, it has been stressed, this is nothing new really, but it has been stressed that people must make a decision of faith in order to come to an appreciation of the existence of God, of the holy, of the transcendent, that this is not something that can be proven empirically, but rather requires the human will to assent to a perception of greater realities beyond the physical and the empirical. That phrase, decision of faith, is really quite significant. So my question is, what do you think religious leaders could do? If you want to confine yourself to rabbinic leaders, that's fine, but in any religious tradition, what can they do to encourage people to make that decision of faith? In other words, to see beyond the empirical, the verifiable, the demonstrable, to a reality that's greater than those things. That's what I think is involved in a decision of faith.
It's a good question. The point that I try to stress in this this lesson was that when especially physics used to be presented at the beginning of the 20th century as a close and finished science. There is no more what to research about. There are no phenomena that physics cannot explain more. There is a very famous anecdote, I don't remember exactly where I saw this, that a teacher in physics said to one of his students, why are you going to study or to devote your life to research physics? Everything is already known. And on that very moment appeared quantum theory, radioactivity. Look, when you enter into the realm of quantum physics, I remember now a conversation that I had with a physicist from an American physicist that developed at the Tel Aviv University, the Department of Subparticles. So in my conversation with him, I told him, you know, at certain point, I feel that quantum physics is something, is mystic, is something beyond the simple understanding. And he said, no, at the beginning, everything is clear, but from certain point onwards, yeah, really, it looks like a world of mysticism. So science itself is telling us, look, things are not so clear. You cannot understand in a simple way what really the equations are telling about. Was a very famous physician that said that here we have the equations of general relativity, and the equations are there, and I'm looking on the equations, but the deep meaning of general relativity demonstrated us that, okay, from one side, we got a lot, we achieved a lot with some sparks in our way of thinking, our thinking capability. We got great things, but what we got is, it's very difficult to be understood in a very simple way. And when you enter all those theories, you feel, who is giving me, who opened my eyes? Because this is not the creation of these theories were not a simple development of an idea that step by step had the capability to construct and to discover all this, and to form and discover all the theories. No, were some jumps in the brain of some people, in the brain of Newton, in the brain of Maxwell. You cannot imagine a logical way going step by step through which you can get, or history, the great physicians of history got their theories, built up their theories. It wasn't some kind of jump, and on this jump of human beings' brains, I see some expression for God. I see some expression that God allowed human being to know a little bit more about, as Einstein used to say, his plans when he created the universe look like.
Thank you. I can think of several follow-ups, but there's also several hands raised. So let's turn to some questions.
My reaction is this. First, more we know, better it is. What God would like to reveal us, it's a blessing for us. We have to know the truth, but, and this is what I would like to stress, to underline, according our Jewish point of view, our Jewish belief, the truth is in the hands of God. Literally, the truth is in the hands of God. So the key word here is the word that was emphasized by Professor Cunningham from all what I said, humility. If you have the humility to know that the whole picture of the universe, we are not going to be able to see, that the whole picture of the universe, we are not going to understand or to have a real comprehension of that. All the more information that we are receiving, better it is. And the second point, of course, is to have in mind what we are going to do with all this information, with the knowledge of the power which is in each atom. Okay, we knew about nuclear bombs and so on.
Thank you. I want to move to the other questions, but since Mr. Kress mentioned this, I think the reason why I raised the question of a decision of faith earlier was if somebody has already made a decision of faith, then they will interpret the patterns in chaos theory accordingly. But if somebody hasn't made that decision or made that leap, or whatever, however one wants to say it, then one can simply say that human beings are pattern makers, and we see patterns in everything, even when they're not there, perhaps on subject. So it's a tricky thing.
Two reasons. The first one is an historical reason. Science and religion used to clash on the past. And the second point is that from an existential point of view, you can see that all the people who worked a lot in science and got a lot in science, they gave some kind of commentaries about God, about their feelings, about look, is science in itself only a subject devoted to the development of devices to make easier our world, or the science, the theoretical science and all the descriptions and all this knowledge has another message for us? What is the message of all this knowledge beside the application of the knowledge? You can say there is no message. You are right. You can say it's your option, but from if you look back, what Einstein said, what Heidegger, what these people who developed all that, their commentaries about that, they made a connection between the creator. They don't forget that Einstein really he is the real founder of the cosmology, and he tried to understand all the cosmos and how the universe is, and to obtain the theory is a relativistic theory, but how to obtain an absolute theory, yeah, a non-relativistic description of the world. And yeah, you're right. You can call that, he can call that the one who ordered the world. But at certain point, you or people in the past, maybe that it will come there also at that certain moment in your life, yeah, that you will ask yourself, okay, what all these theories are telling me? What is the message? What is this relevant for the interior of my life, from the deep inner part in my life? As this some message, you are you have absolutely the right to say, this has not a message. And life, as Monod said, the very famous physiologist Jacques Monod said, everything is probabilities, randomness, and necessity, as his famous book.
So I'm going to continue the dialogue between these two realms, as we've been saying. We were at the hour point, but there are 4 people that have raised hands. If you could quickly articulate your question, I'll ask, and I'll keep track of them, but I'll ask Rabbi Skorka to try and engage them, and that will be it for the conversation, I fear. Since we are creatures of space-time and we're limited in time at this point. So
just a few questions regarding the pandemic. It shocked me a lot what occurred as the whole humanity, and one of the things that shocked me in a special way was the fact that not so easily science got the vaccine. It was a process. It was not a piece of cake, to say that very roughly. It was no simple. They had to deal with all kinds of problems. This was a good example to show the greatness of science, but from the other side, all the lacks that you have in science, or the doubts, or all the problems, in order to get a whole knowledge. Regarding chaos, from everything you can learn something. For me, the point in chaos, beside that, in chaotic processes, you can find that there, from the very known experiments of the beginning of the 20th century, you can find ordered structures. But studying the chaos and studying all the theme in the realm of thermodynamics, especially I am referring to Prigoghine's theory, his conclusions that there is an arrow of time. Time goes ahead. The equations, the physical equations are not, even in quantum chemistry, are not exact, because you cannot go back in the whole processes in nature, which is also a conclusion of chaos and thermodynamics of chaos. It's a great point, and from everything we can learn something. And to know that there is an arrow, if we accept that this is a correct theory, that there is an arrow in time that can change, must change our image of universe and our reality, about through and rationality. Two very short comments. The world, objectively talking, the existential world in which we are living now is absolutely an irrational world, not a world of humbleness, not a world of humility, a world of passions, not a world of it's as I said, it's the world of the absurd. After you well remember that after the Second World War, trying to, quotation signs, understand Nazism, appeared the theater of the absurd. Yeah, the very famous UNESCO and his very famous play Reno. In our Jewish tradition, we have the right to ask ourselves, and even from God, why things are as they are. You know, there is a whole book in the Bible devoted to the story of a man who's in Hebrew, his name is Eov, in Job in English, and it's the story of a man who suffered a lot, and he's asking for God, God, please explain me. Okay, about what was and how was the explanation of God. This could be a good theme for another lesson. But Jeremiah also, at the beginning of chapter 12, for instance, ask God directly, tell me, God, why the bad people are living so good? So we can ask from God everything, and each one will find in themselves, an answer from God, or whatsoever, or not, or nothing, or silence, or this is our existence. I used to say that we have like a curtain, a little bit transparent curtain, a little bit it's not so transparent, but a curtain between we and God. The one who believes, he knows that someone is behind the curtain. The one who doesn't believe, okay, suppose that behind the curtain, nothing.
Well, I'm afraid that our time has elapsed. Thank you all. I want to thank Rabbi Skorka, of course, our speaker for today, and invite you all to participate further in the conversations about science and religion and that will unfold in the future. I would like now to turn the microphone back to Rabbi Wallace for some concluding comments, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rabbi Skorka, and thank you also, Professor Cunningham. And thank you all for attending this first session of the Science and Religion Reading Group in Interfaith Contexts. I'll just remind you, our next session is on the 25th of October. It will be Professor Lori Zoloff, I think I've pronounced that correctly, with a very interesting title, Strangers on a Train, Climate Change, Jewish Thought, and the Duty of Witness. And I also wanted to flag, because Rabbi, you mentioned Psalm 19, we do have as well our Psalms in Interfaith Context, which is, I think this Thursday, so 22nd of September, on Psalm 19 and Muslim reflections on creation. So please join us for either or both. And thank you all very much again, and have a lovely evening.
Thank you. L'Shana Tova to our Jewish friends.
Thanks.